Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have my book review of the book To Green Angel Tower by Tad Williams. This is the third book and final book in the Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn Trilogy. I began this trilogy about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, when I read The Dragonbone Chair in 2022, and I really respected the book. I did not love the book. It didn't hook me as much as I would have wanted it to. I gave it like a 7 out of 10, but I respected the prose, and I respected the type of story that Tad Williams was telling, and it used a lot of familiar tropes that I liked. So I read this in mid-2022, and then I eventually, in about January of 2023, picked up The Stone of Farewell, and I just felt underwhelmed. I was hoping this would be a big step up. I was hoping I would love it more. Just didn't work out as much. I gave it like a 6 or a 7 out of 10. Like, it was well crafted, but just not enjoyable for me. And so I was just like, all right, well, I have the third book finally. But the third book's massive, and it would be one of the longest books I'd ever read, and I just was not ready for that prose. And so I put it off for almost 2 years, from January of 2023 till November of 2024. I put it off, and I decided that December of 2024 would be my month of tomes, and so I decided to pick up To Green Angel Tower. I actually started it at the end of November, but I finished it in December, and so I picked up To Green Angel Tower, and I was pleasantly surprised. It is my favorite book of the three, and it really makes me appreciate the first two books more. So, this book is a big wrap-up book. It has the first half of the book really is setting up a lot of events, and the last portion of the book is really paying off all of those setups. The first thing is you have to get all the chess pieces everywhere, and really you have to set things up for the end. So they had to, of course, get like Miriamil back to the main cast. She had been off with Kadrak and some other characters, and you also had to get Simon with the main cast and also away from the main cast for some things, and you had to have some battles, and then eventually had the main event of getting all the characters to Green Angel Tower, which is the title, which is just an interesting title. This is, if they just called it Green Angel Tower, that would have worked, but the fact that it's called To Green Angel Tower gives it a very different style, different flavor, whereas the other ones are just named for the place, like Stone of Farewell, the Dragonbone Chair. This is named for the action, going to Green Angel Tower. This was very, very curious to me. The first part of the book, I was overwhelmed because it had been like 2 years since I read the books, and I was worried I wouldn't remember stuff, but I think Tad Williams did a fantastic job of reintroducing the characters and making me feel like, oh, I know what's happening here. I remember everything just about. There were a few minor characters that just were like, I guess maybe I knew them before, but I know them now because they were just introduced, but for the most part, most of the characters were introduced in a way that I was like, oh yeah, I kind of remember that a little bit. So I think Tad Williams did a good job there. For me, my favorite part of the book was the middle part of the book, which basically is Miriamil and Simon's story. Without giving spoilers, at some point they do connect back together, and they go off and do their own thing for a portion of the book, and that was my absolute favorite. They are two characters that I so connected with, and you empathize with Miriamil because she goes through some awful stuff in this book. I mean, truly awful stuff at the beginning of this book, and yet you feel bad for her because it's affected her self-esteem, it's affected the way she thinks other people look at her. And then you have Simon, who is just a thick, wool-headed boy who is becoming a man, who, is very much in love with Miriamil and doesn't know how to express that interest in her. And whenever he does, she just has such low self-esteem that she thinks there's no way that, she would be a good fit for him. And it's such a fascinating character dynamic. And even though their part of the story was actually the slowest part of the book, where not much event-wise was happening, it was my favorite part of the book because I just connected so well with those characters. However, I do have some problems with the book, in parts, particularly towards the end, but also in the middle and early part of the book. There's just so much that Tad Williams added to make the story bigger. He had huge casts, he had huge overarching plot lines, he had so many POVs in this book. Oh my goodness, is there a lot of POVs in this book. And this came before some of the stuff I'm going to reference, but I think most fantasy readers will understand. I think the series started out as a good Shannara-like series. It's like Shannara, but it's really focused on its prose. And I think that's why, Dragonbone Chair and Sona Farewell worked for what they were, 500 to 600 pages in trade paperback. Decent length books, pretty long for what they were, but, it fit. For Green Angel Tower, it felt like Tad Williams was turning it into like a Game of Thrones or The Wheel of Time, where he wanted a huge, overarching story with tons of characters, and he wanted these big epic battles, and he wanted these plot lines to intersect, and he wanted huge, crazy fantasy-related magic system stuff happening. And so it felt like this, where the first two books were more Shannara-like, the last book was more Game of Thrones and Wheel of Time-like. Obviously, Wheel of Time and Game of Thrones came after this book, and in fact were somewhat influenced by this book. But I feel like he should have stuck with the blueprint. He should have made the book, the core of it, Joshua and Simon and Miriamil, and you had minor characters around them, but they're the three POV characters, and then maybe show pirates and the King Elias and things like that to show the villains. But really, it should have just focused on Joshua, Miriamil, and Simon. And instead, you had this huge cast of characters who, some of them were interesting, but I felt like it took away from the experience. If this had been about the same length as the first two and been more honed in, this could have ended up as a top fantasy book of the year for me. Instead, because it felt so huge and just not all the plot lines hit for me, it just felt bloated. And I was like, you could have cut 300 pages of this, maybe 350 or 400 pages. It was so much of this I felt should have been cut. The ending of this book is huge and explosive, and it reminded me of the kind of feelings I had reading the final Wheel of Time book, A Memory of Light, and which is good because I love that book, and I love this, and I think that the final battle and events of this book really are paid off well and set up well, and I think that this book also has a great denouement. The denouement in this book is fantastic. And in fact, the denouement of this book also reminds me of A Memory of Light. If you've read this book, a certain character comes back that you didn't expect to come back. And I was like, oh, that's kind of like another thing that happened. Anyway, I won't spoil specifically who or how, but I really thought that was delightful. So I really liked the middle of the book with Simon and Miriamil. I really liked the denouement. I really liked where he ended up the characters and where he planned all the plot lines and stuff like that. It's a very satisfying ending. If if you're connected with these characters in this world, you will feel satisfied. I don't particularly feel connected to a lot of the minor characters, but I liked Benebek, and I liked his story in the book, and I liked Isgrimner is I think how you pronounce it, and some of the other characters, but really for me it's all about Simon and Miriamil. Also, it took me forever to realize that the Scythi in this book are basically like elves. That took me way too long to realize. I was like midway through the book and I was like, oh, I'm on the final book of the series and I'm finally getting this. Because Benebek and the trolls are kind of like dwarves. I was like, oh, so the Scythi are kind of like the elves. Anyway, maybe other people don't feel it that way, but that's how I felt about it. I do want to take a quick second to talk about the gorgeous covers. Originally, when these came out in hardcover, the top of the cover is kind of cut off and the bottom of it was cut off, but when they did these trade paperback editions, which are gorgeous, I have this protective covering on them, so I apologize if it kind of looks weird, but the painting is shown in its full glory on these books, and I absolutely love it. This is a Michael Whalen. These are Michael Whalen paintings, and this painting is also just gorgeous. Interesting to have, Simon and what I assume is I'm forgetting who else is on the cover. Is that Miriam? But Simon and someone else on the cover here. To just Simon alone. To Simon and Miriam on this cover. Just interesting choices. But I really enjoyed the book. I think I made a mistake choosing to read Two Green Angel Tower right before I'm reading Wind and Truth, which is Brandon Sanderson's epic conclusion to the first arc of the Stormlight Archive. Both are huge, like 450, 500,000 word books, and both are end of a series, kind of, and both, are supposed to have huge payoffs and stuff, so I should not have scheduled them so close together. But I've completed it. I'm happy I completed it. Memory of Sorrow and Thorn is not going to go down as a favorite fantasy series. It's not going to make it into my top 10. I'll give this one like an 8. It is a step up, and it was enjoyable for me compared to the first two books, but it's not a top tier book. But I respect a lot of what Tad Williams did in this, and respect what it did for the series, and really enjoyed this particular book. But when I look at the series as a whole, I think this is a good series, fantasy series. It's just not a personal favorite of mine. But I understand why Brian Lee Durfee and others who absolutely love the Memory Star and Thorn series feel. I don't know if I will ever get to Tad Williams' Otherland series or his sequel series to this, The Last King of Ostenard, or if I'll get to his Shadow March or any of that stuff. I might, and it's entirely possible. I do have on my shelves one of his standalones, The War of the Rose Flowers, War of the Roses. What is it called? War of the Flowers is what it's called. And that's, it's a standalone. I might be able to read that one, fit it in somewhere, maybe next year. We'll see how that goes. But at least for now, I'm glad I finished the entire trilogy, and I am looking forward to completing more series. I can cross this one off my list. If you've read Two Green Angel Tower, what did you think of it? What did you think of the denouement? What did you think of where Simon and Miriam and Joshua all ended up? Let me know all the thoughts in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.